So the trade happened this week. Sam Darnold went to the Carolina Panthers, and now I'm seeing all over Twitter that you got to go buy Sam Darnold, and it doesn't make sense. So let's dive in. Sam Darnold has been objectively one of the worst quarterbacks in football since entering the NFL. So let's talk about his journey. Let's talk about where he started and where it's going. So to begin with, he was a third overall pick to the New York Jets back in 2018. He was actually my third quarterback ranked in that class. Well, at the time, I didn't have the same process that I have now, but I had Sam Darnold as a maybe grade, which would equate to a long shot. I had Josh Allen as a bust. I had Josh Rosen as a bust. I didn't appreciate how much draft capital actually matters at the position. I thought that just because these guys had bad profiles, they would be bad. Fortunately, now I have looked into a little more, and I found out that even the worst quarterbacks drafted in the top half of the first round, they still hit at a pretty good rate. Even the worst one. So draft capital bumps all three of those guys into the coin flip tier. And then we have Baker Mayfield as a bulletproof prospect and Lamar Jackson as a bulletproof prospect. So at the time, I thought Sam Darnold had like an Andy Dalton-like ceiling. Like I was like, yeah, he could be all right. He could be like a, long-range starter. If he gets his AJ Green, he could have a couple, fantasy seasons that actually matter. So far through 3 years, he has produced exactly 0 top 24 fantasy finishes. That's the same number as Josh Rosen. That ain't good. At least Baker Mayfield has 3. Like, to hit a top 24 season, basically all you need to do is be the starter for the year. Because there's enough players that get hurt or replaced that it's really not that hard to hit top 24. Sam Darnold hasn't been able to do that with the Jets. So when I'm like going through the prospect profile on these players, one of the things I use is called Cubase, and they've actually changed it, so I can't use it anymore, but I used to use it, and his Cubase was 412, which placed him 35 out of 51 quarterbacks in the first round. That's below the threshold that I'm looking for. Not a great prospect. His age-adjusted PFF grades at age 19 was 86.7, but then at age 20, he took a dramatic step down to 82.1. That put him 15 out of 30 first-rounders. That's not good. He was just an ordinary first-round pick, which just isn't good enough. That's, Andy Dalton level territory. So then he gets to the Jets, and we get to see what he can do in the NFL. This is where we use our sophomore comps. Again, I'm not finished doing my sophomore comps on quarterbacks. I'm still working around it, but this is what it looks like. So offensive grade and QB rating from PFF puts him into a bucket, and his coin flip grade from my prospect grading puts him into a bucket with Josh Allen and Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill is an interesting case because we're going to talk about him shortly. Dwayne Haskins, Mitch Trubisky, and Sam Bradford, the other 3 guys in his cohort, and those 3 guys obviously didn't hit top 12. Which is interesting. I thought Mitch Trubisky was, but he must have just missed it. Then we get to 2020. We're going to skip over the middle years because it doesn't matter. We get to 2020, and 2020 was an unmitigated disaster for Sam Darnold. He missed 4 games. He only played 12 games, yet he was 4th in the NFL in interceptable passes. That isn't good. And in those 12 games that he did play, they only passed 30.3 attempts per game. That's not very many attempts per game. So for him to be the 4th highest interceptable pass quarterback in the NFL in raw volume, despite low volume and missing games, is atrocious. This is evidence of a quarterback making terrible decisions. This isn't an Adam Gase effect. This is Sam Darnold throwing into coverage is basically what it comes down to. One of the funny things, he only had 9 passing touchdowns last year, and nobody talks about that. Like 9. That's crazy. Everybody's all over Cam Newton for only throwing 8. Cam Newton, I think, played 3 more games, but he only threw 9. Sam Darnold only threw 9. That's just wild to me. And then where it gets really interesting, these, in my opinion, are not Adam Gase stats. These are Sam Darnold stats. So we're looking at air yards per attempt. He was 7.2. That's number 27 in the NFL. That is way behind Tua Tagovailoa, who you guys all seem to hate because of his air yards per attempt. And despite having one of the lowest air yards per attempt in the world, his accuracy rating from playerprofiler.com was 7.0, number 30 in the NFL. He was inaccurate on short passes. He was league worst inaccurate on league worst depth of target. That's wild. His catchable pass rate was 69%. That's number 43 in the NFL. That means that there were 11 backup quarterbacks that were throwing more catchable passes, or they're throwing catchable passes at a higher rate than Sam Darnold. These are not Adam Gase stats. I know there's a narrative that Adam Gase ruins everything, but these are not Adam Gase stats. And we're going to talk about that Adam Gase narrative in just a minute. So his true completion percentage, 67%, number 35 in the NFL. His true passer rating, 58.3, number 37 in the NFL. These are not good numbers. These are terrible numbers. These are league worst quarterback numbers. His EPA plus CPOE, that's his expected points added plus his completion percentage over expected. When you add them together, Sam Darnold comes in with a .014, which is quarterback 31 in the NFL. Quarterback 32 was Carson Wentz, and they only rank 32. They only do the 32 starting quarterbacks. This is from rbsdm.com/stats. So go there, you can check it out. It's a fantastic. This is one of the most predictive metrics we have. Sam Darnold was the worst, but I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's Adam Gase's fault. It's a supporting cast. He can't possibly be expected to be anything better than the worst quarterback in the league. His passing grade from PFF, 2018 was 62.9. That's pre-Gase. That's his rookie year. And then 2019 was 64.3. And now in his third year in 2020, it went down to 52.7. Sam Darnold was awful. So now let's talk about Ryan Tannehill, because this is the narrative that everyone's jumping on when they're saying, oh, look at what Tannehill did when he left Gase. The weird thing is, Ryan Tannehill actually improved from an efficiency perspective under Adam Gase. Adam Gase made Ryan Tannehill better. Adam Gase took Ryan Tannehill. Sorry, let's start this again. Pre-Adam Gase, Ryan Tannehill's yards per attempt, which is one of my favorite metrics for quarterbacks. It doesn't tell the whole story, so don't go off on a tangent that yard per attempt is telling us everything. It isn't, but it paints a pretty nice story. Pre-Adam Gase, 6.9 yards per attempt. With Adam Gase, 7.5 yards per attempt. Tannehill wasn't good before Gase got there. Gase arrived. Tannehill got a lot better. In fact, Tannehill had a 6.2% TD rate his final season with Adam Gase. By far, the best of his career at that point. In 2018, Gase's last with the Dolphins, Ryan Tannehill started 11 games. He had 7.2 yards per attempt. Brock Osweiler, who everyone loves to dump on as the worst quarterback of all time, Brock Osweiler started 5 games that year, and he had a yards per attempt of 7.0. Sam Darnold, under Adam Gase in 2020, had a 6.1 yards per attempt. He was substantially worse than Brock Osweiler. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's not because of Gase now. We're thinking it's because of the supporting cast. It's the supporting cast that did them in. So let's take a look at the supporting cast in that 2018 team where Ryan Tannehill and Brock Osweiler were just lighting it up compared to Sam Darnold's 2020 season. In 2018, Ryan Tannehill, Brock Osweiler were throwing to superstars such as Danny Amendola, who led the team with 575 receiving yards. Kenny Stills, who was second on the team with 553 receiving yards. And then we have Kenyon Drake, which is kind of surprising to me. I didn't realize he had this much receiving work. 477 receiving yards. Albert Wilson with 391. Devontae Parker had 309 in 11 games. Jakeem Grant had 268. Mike Gesicki, 202. I think that was his rookie year, though. Frank Gore with 124. Leonte Carew, 94. And Nick O'Leary, 86. This was terrible. This was as bad or worse than the New York Jets while Sam Darnold was playing under Adam Gase. Sam Darnold is a bad quarterback. It's not an Adam Gase factor. It's not a supporting cast factor. We have no reason to believe that Sam Darnold is actually good at football. And if you want to take another look at it, let's look at yards per attempt. Last year, in 2020, we have Sam Darnold with a 6.1 yards per attempt, as I've said. Remember, Darnold only played 12 games. I meant the backup had to start 4 of them. Joe Flacco started 4 games. His yards per attempt, 6.4. Joe Flacco was more efficient than Sam Darnold on the same team with the same coach and the same supporting cast. Why are you guys buying Sam Darnold? It doesn't make sense. Granted, we are going to a new situation with all the weapons in the world and Joe Brady. I get it. Like, DJ Moore is by far the best wide receiver that Sam Darnold will have ever had. He's still got Robbie Anderson. That's who he was with in New York for the first couple years. And Joe Brady, I'm not really sure what to make of Joe Brady. We see these coaches coming to the NFL and everybody thinks they're going to, change the game per se. There was that coach Chip Kelly for the Eagles that, oh my goodness, look at Chip Kelly's offense. He's doing things nobody's ever done before. And like a year later, they already figured him out. So when we look at Joe Brady's offense, there's a tweet here from PFF_Mood. So in 2020, it was a pandemic year in which defenses struggled early on. In the second half of the season, the Panthers ranked number 30 in EPA per pass play, better than only the Bengals and Jaguars, both with backup quarterbacks. So is Joe Brady the genius some believe he is? And I got to tell you, Teddy Bridgewater was the quarterback. And I'm not saying Teddy Bridgewater is the best quarterback in the NFL. He is far from that. But he is also far from the worst quarterback in the NFL. He was substantially better than Sam Darnold in all those efficiency metrics that try to take situation and coaching and supporting cast out of the equation. Teddy Bridgewater is a league average to slightly below league average quarterback. Certainly not somebody you want to tie your hopes to for the long term, but somebody that isn't terrible. Somebody that should be providing better than number 30 in EPA per pass play. That's wild. Now we have Sam Darnold there. And this is just a really high-level projection just to illustrate how much you don't want to buy Sam Darnold in Dynasty or redraft for that matter. I mean, in redraft, if you can get him like, the last quarterback off the board or off waivers maybe, then you could roster him for a week or two and just to see, because you never really know. But here's where we go. Last year, the Carolina Panthers passed 34.4 attempts per game. This is the only year we're using because it's the only one we have of them in the NFL. Over 16 games, that's 550 attempts. Sam Darnold's career is 6.6 yards per attempt. I am not taking out his rookie year because it actually ups his average, which is hilarious. So 6.6 times 550 attempts is 3,630 passing yards. That ain't winning anyone any fantasy leagues. Sam Darnold is going to have to take a monster step forward in his first year in Carolina. To get to 4,000 passing yards in that volume, he's going to have to jump all the way to 7.2 yards per attempt. That would be unreal. I would never project somebody to exceed their career average by 0.6 yards per attempt. Could it happen? Of course it could. We don't know what's going on in Sam Darnold's head. All that we can make our decisions based on is what we can see that he did on the field. That's what we can base it on. And based on what he did on the field in his 3 years in the NFL and his 3 years I think he only started 2 years at USC, Sam Darnold isn't good at throwing footballs. Stop buying Sam Darnold. You got to punt this guy. Let him hit on somebody else's roster if he exceeds all expectation. To be perfectly honest, if he was a difference maker, we would have seen him make a difference.